but Chase isn't here to actually comment on that. So Kelly's manifesto presents us with a very neat binary that is quite brilliant in its simplicity, and I think we can think of others. Julia, you mentioned this innovation versus improvisation. I was thinking also of Levi-Strauss, the Greek builder and the scientist, so these are all very appealing because they are so simple. But what I love about Kelly's is that this binary cuts into some of the very complicated intersections between labor and work on the one hand, and questions of gender, race, and class, which she really explores in her artistic work and not so much in the manifesto, which is really more binarized. So just to give you a brief slam history, slam began in the 1980s in Chicago and became a fixture in cities across the country, partly through TV shows such as HBO's Brave New Voices. The format quickly spread worldwide, due in part to online videos, and has gained traction, especially among urban youth. And it reached Madagascar in 2003 when a French poet held slam workshops in Antananarivo, the capital, or Tana for short. And since then, the Malagasy slam community has grown from a handful of poets to a very large and prominent organization called Madagaslam. I first visited for undergraduate fieldwork in 2008, and this was a time of relative political and economic stability, and the slam scene there was already quite popular. They had a website, they were on TV, they were on the radio. They sent 2 or 3 poets in different years to Paris for an international slam competition. They came in the top 3 every time, so quite talented. And then shortly after I left in 2009, the mayor of Tana staged a coup. Some of you may have heard about it. He gained the support of the military and kicked out the president. So I'll say a bit more about that later, but because of the limited time, I just wanted to show you 2 brief clips from 2 female slam poets who performed last June in a competition hosted by the German Cultural Center. And most of the slam performances in Madagascar are supported by foreign cultural centers. So just to give you a brief background of what this competition was, they held a slam in Johannesburg, and the winner of that competition traveled to Tana. The winner of the competition in Tana traveled to Cameroon, and they did a kind of tag team slam that way. And I should also note that the participants in Madagascar were asked to write something about, or that was inspired by, the winning poet's poem in Johannesburg. So, and that poem was very political. So a lot of the poetry in this performance happened to be more political than is usually the case. But I wanted to show you these clips as a way of approaching these 2 questions. First, how the work of contestation or protest has been gendered in particular ways. And second, how it fits into but also troubles this binary that Kelly sets up of maintenance and development. So this first clip is it's the very end of a poem by a Ghanaian Malagasy poet named Crystal Tete. And I don't have fancy sound, so you'll just have to, hopefully you can hear it.
Anyone can write poetry. Feel free to take it down. Anyone can walk away with modern violence. Anyone can lend a voice to chivalry and humility. Anyone from Obama to Sturdy to Suchi to Fidel to you. Anyone can surprise me. Anyone can write poetry. Make your voice heard.
Okay, so I have the text on the next page. It's always complicated writing up slam text. This is these are my line breaks and my punctuation. So I want to highlight here the way in which Crystal aligns poetry with the political actions of taking a stand, walking away from undesirable or harmful actions such as fraud and violence, and that these are all framed as being related to voice. So lending one's voice for causes we believe in and making one's own voice heard. This is a trope that recurs frequently in slam, and also in written poetry, but I think, of course, in slam it's very literal. You do actually give your voice to something and make your voice heard. And note, too, that Crystal doesn't just encourage us to emulate other poets or other artists. She really tells us our role models here are politicians. And so she really makes this link between art or poetry politics very, very clear. It's also significant that half of the politicians she names are women: Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the current president of Liberia, and Aung San Suu Kyi, the Burmese politician. And there are frequent explicit references in this poem, as well as in other poems by Crystal, that references to women's rights, to patriarchal oppression of women. But in addressing this poem to you, and by specifying that literally anyone can do this work of contestation through poetry, Crystal really highlights both that women too can voice political and social critique through poetry, and that men can likewise use poetry to speak out against the oppression of women. So the majority of slam poets in Madagascar are male, and when I asked in interviews why this was, I got a range of responses, one of many of which were the very common sort of, well, women write about their personal lives, they write about love, and men write about things that are more interesting to everybody, to a broader audience. And of course, all of those comments, not of course, but all of those comments were from male poets. The female poets, Crystal and the next poet that I'll show, Ranala, referenced culture, tradition, education. Crystal said, and I quote, "You can't raise a girl with pigtails and pink dresses to be in the kitchen and be silent, and then expect her to stand up and do a poem." So Crystal's poem is an anomaly in that most slam poetry performed in Madagascar is in Malagasy or in French. It's about half-half, or it can be a mix of both in one poem. So this next poem by Ranala Vuni is in French, but I will show my translation after that.
Lorsqu'une ligne subtile existe entre l'amour et la haine, moi j'ai l'honneur de vous dire que je déclare l'horreur de mes 4 vérités. 1 pour toutes ces bouches qui ne touchent plus une seule cuillère depuis hier, avant-hier, maintenant depuis longtemps. 2 pour toutes ces mains en panne qui peinent à peigner les ABCD de leur propre nom. 3 pour tous les biens mal acquis de ceux qui n'ont pas voulu suer, mais qui ont seulement su tuer grâce à votre ami l'insécurité. 4 pour la tranquillité que vous ne méritez pas et pour l'apaisement qui devrait vous quitter. Pour tout cela, j'ai l'horreur de vous déclarer la guerre.
So she came in second. Let's see why. This is the text. I'll give you a couple seconds to read that. So the you in this poem, although it's never stated explicitly, is addressing the former president, so the mayor of Tana, he's now the mayor of Tana who came to power through this coup in 2009. And he's now the ex-president because he was, they just held elections this past December. So this coup that so at this time he was still in power, and this coup led to a period of extreme poverty. Foreign aid in Madagascar at that time, in 2009, comprised about 58% of Madagascar's GDP. So when the US, for example, pulled out their aid because this was not a democratic government, you can imagine what that did to the economy. So what's interesting to me in this poem is that it is combative. So Ranala is, after all, declaring a war, but it is reluctantly combative. So it's not with honor that she does this, but with horror. And it seems that this act of war is both necessary and distasteful. The only peace here is that which has been usurped by the president, and which is therefore illegitimate. It is a peace that he should give up because he is the only one to possess it. So both Ranala and Crystal upend some of the stereotypes I mentioned about female poets who only write about their love life or whatever. But in putting these poems in dialogue with each other and with you, Kelly's, I started to wonder about how protest or critique might fit in with this development and maintenance model. So at first blush, we might think that protest and critique are creative, productive, that they attempt to dismantle or disrupt the status quo so that they are, in you, Kelly's terms, some kind of development. But one might also protest or contest a too rapid development, or a development in the wrong direction, or something that gets touted as new but is actually just more of the same. So in Renala's critique of the former president, she is protesting against his protest and against his inability to sustain a certain quality of life for the rest of the country, so he's unable to maintain that. So she pushes us to ask how much we must disrupt in order to achieve some kind of balance, or to return to a balance we once had. And Crystal reminds us that this work of contestation is everyone's work, that we must all speak up on behalf of ourselves and on behalf of others. So I'll just put up, Crystal has a website, Renala does not. If you're interested in the German Institute project, you can click on that link, or write it down. But I think these are themes and concerns that resonate with some of the questions that both Hai and Julia raised, and I'm looking forward to talking about it all.